Hi, I'm Aga Bajer.
Hi, I'm Shani Person.
Welcome to The Deep Dive, a monthly CultureLab podcast where we dive headfirst into a topic that is crucial for building thriving cultures at scale. Join us as we geek out and explore the intricacies of culture, discussing everything from the latest trends to timeless philosophies.
With each episode, we take a deep dive into a specific area, offering unique perspectives and insights on how to create and sustain a culture that fosters growth, innovation, and success.
Whether you are a business leader, HR professional, or just someone interested in understanding how cultures work, the CultureLab's Deep Dive is the show for you.
So sit back, relax, and get ready to take the plunge into the fascinating world of culture with us.
And today, we're going to talk about intergenerational synergies at work. And here is a message from our friends, Frances Fry and Anne Morris, about their fantastic new TED podcast.
Hi, I'm Frances Fry.
And I'm Anne Morris.
And we are the hosts of a new TED podcast called Fixable.
We've helped leaders at some of the world's most competitive companies solve all kinds of problems.
On our show, we'll pull back the curtain and give you the type of honest, unfiltered advice we usually reserve for top executives.
Maybe you have a coworker with boundary issues, or you want to know how to inspire and motivate your team.
No problem is too big or too small. Give us a call and we'll help you solve the problems you're stuck on. Find Fixable wherever you listen to podcasts.
I will shortly share the conversation we had with Shani. But first, let me tell you about the CultureBrained community and the amazing offer we have for you if you join us until November 15th. So CultureBrained is this place where culture leaders connect with exceptional peers and also learn from world-class experts. Some of them, by the way, are the guests on this show. It's also where they can get all the support they need to cultivate a culture where people do their best work. We have a private member platform, toolkits, resources, an amazing video library, and we make constant additions and improvements based on the question that is at the center of our work. How can we best support the people who work on company culture? So if you are curious to learn more, go to tinyurl.com/CultureBrained. And when you apply, mention this promo code for a 25% discount. CB25. And now, with no further ado, here's Shani and I riffing on the topic of the month, intergenerational synergies at work.
Hey, Aga.
Hey, Shani.
I'm so excited to be here again.
I know, I'm excited too.
This month, we have a really exciting topic. I feel like it's an extension of our last discussion around diversity. We are looking at intergenerational synergies, which is also your topic of the month in the CultureBrained community. And I'm thinking, I had to read around a little, and it's really interesting also just to see kind of how our workforce, we're getting increasingly older, but so of course then is the workforce. And yet there's so much friction and there's so much talk about these like different generations and what each generation brings and how do we make it work with all of them being present in the workplace at the same time. And that can be a little bit of a challenge.
It can be. Yeah. 5 generations in the workplace. I think it's the first time in the history of humankind that actually 5 generations from, I think the so-called silent generation to Gen Z are expected to harmoniously work together. And I think the reality for everyone is that whilst there is some work being done, I think the word harmony might be still missing when it comes to that intergenerational collaboration. So I'm really keen to dive into this topic because obviously this is going to be our future. We all know that we will work longer. We talk about 100-year lives at least. And I think medicine is really taking us in this direction. And that, of course, is going to have serious ramifications for the workplace as well. So we need to figure out how to do it, how to work with people who belong to different generations than ours. And there's still, I feel, quite a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, I agree. When I thought about this, and the topic that I love when we do is the beef, the myth busting. Let's get straight to the beef. So let's talk about that. What qualities are we wrongfully pasting onto older age, do you think?
The first thing that comes to mind is that obviously older generations are not tech savvy, which is actually true in some cases, but also incredibly wrong in some other cases. And this is where I think those stereotypes can be challenged. My father, for example, he's 84 years old and he's using ChatGPT to do his research on basketball. And he's incredibly tech savvy for a person of his age. So obviously that's just a myth. So I would be very happy to bust this one. And by the way, my father is not an exception. It was equally true for my mom. And a lot of their friends, they were people who were always looking for recent developments in technology and trying to apply them to their lives really early on. So super early adapters, actually. So yeah, that's some beef that I have with some of these stereotypes for sure. How about you?
My beef is that we often associate age with change resistance. And while it can certainly be true, I think it can equally be true at many different ages and stages in life. I think it's more actually of a personality thing than an age thing. And sometimes I kind of find that people who have had more experience are also maybe less stressed about the change and have more peace about it or more hope or other things. So I don't necessarily think that that's at all attributed to age. And I feel it's a pity because we kind of exclude those people then already before we even give them a chance because they might already be resistant or they might already say no to this. And I would say, one of the most future-oriented people I know is in his 70s and he's always out and he's manifesting and he has ideas and he's investing in things. And it's like, if I had even just a fifth of his energy, I would fly. That's my beef.
I know. And all these stereotypes that really boxing people in. And sometimes I have to say that I wonder whether maybe we're creating like these self-fulfilling prophecies almost by treating people according to these stereotypes. And then some people kind of fall into it because that's the expectation, right? And we love living up to other people's expectations to a certain extent. So I think it's super damaging actually to be attaching these labels to certain age groups. It doesn't do anyone any service. And there are more. I mean, these are just a couple that we talked about when it comes to people of, let's call it, more mature age. What are some of the stereotypes that you disagree with when it comes to younger generations?
I think we're all humans all of our life. And whether we're resistant to change or open to it, it's a little bit more about our habits and our lifestyle and our personality than it is anything else. So I would also say that while we might in younger age experience that we have more energy to do certain things, I also think it's an assumption that you can deal with more of it, more diversity, more change, more new initiatives just because you're younger. I feel like what I've seen in organizations is change is hard for everyone. Like new things are difficult for everyone. And the people who thrive are those who have good strategies and good tools. And it doesn't necessarily have to be attributed to it. And equally with young age, I think we attribute different types of priorities. And I'm very mindful here because I don't know what priorities are. I think priorities are more related to where we are in life rather than necessarily what age we have. We kind of mix it all up a little. How about you?
I agree with you. And I think that, especially the youngest generations in the workplace right now are actually probably the least well-equipped generations to deal with stress and change for many reasons that we can get into. But actually that assumption exactly that younger people are going to be more adaptable and able and willing to take on more more change, more work, more burden. Of course, we know is not true, right? So I think that kind of bugs me. What also irritates me is this stereotype that young people, all young people are entitled and they expect fast progression without putting in the work always and are basically sort of lacking the basic work ethics that older generations have or consider to be important in the workplace. I know personally, and I do work with people of the younger generation who have amazing work ethics and who are willing to put in the work. So obviously it's not true. But at the same time, I do see some challenges that arise that make intergenerational work challenging. And I do see people struggling in the workplace, working with people of different generations. So my question to you would be, first of all, what do you see? And if you see some struggle, where do you think is it rooted?
I think it goes back to a little bit the discussion that we had last time of these camps that we create, right? We make assumptions, we associate wrongfully things about people of different age groups. And then there's this friction that stems from absolutely nothing. Actually, it doesn't stem from experience. It stems from assumption. I think that's part of the struggle is we verbally brand different groups and different generations in a certain way. And then as you were saying before, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of we can't really get past it. We go in and we relate to people that way based on a story that we heard or an assumption that we made. So I feel like, yeah, that's one thing is really the biases and the assumptions and associated with that kind of the lack of curiosity, actually. One thing that I also see is that we forget about this element of being complementary sometimes. There's also this idolizing of the need to always be fast or the need to always approach things in a certain way or the need to always be modern and think new and always innovate. And there's a reason why traditions also exist. And I'm the first one to question most things, but I also think that sometimes we're losing out on this complementary play of going, hey, you know what? If you've had 30 years of experience in something, you might have observed a thing or two. And there are ways of taking guidance from each other, not making it one person holding the flag and the rest to follow, but how can we kind of leverage the energy and the questions of one camp with perhaps the perspective and experience of another. And I feel like we often lose out on that, actually, that instead we kind of, on each side, we're demonizing this. You always want to have more and faster, or you always want to pull back and be traditional, or whatever the narratives are. And rather, if we were to look more at how we can be complementary and how those two can actually help each other out, then I think it would benefit us.
Yeah, this is really huge, Shani. This willingness to be curious, and it has to be rooted in respect, right? Because you are not going to be curious about someone who you believe is irrelevant or doesn't have something to offer or has bad intentions. So to me, it all starts really from the foundations of an inclusive workplace and of a workplace where people really can feel like they belong. And the foundation is, no matter who you are and what your background is, you are going to be seen, heard, and respected for who you are as a person, full stop. Kind of unconditionally, really. So whether you are incredibly young or quite advanced in age, people will be curious about you and your perspective because there is this implicit assumption that you have something valuable to offer. And what I find is exactly that we are forming these camps. So it's us and them, and it can be quite polarizing. And then, of course, confirmation bias gets into play, and whatever happens, we just find the confirmation of our beliefs about the other group, right? So I totally agree with you that this lack of curiosity potentially really being rooted in the fact that we assume that the other groups don't have something valuable to bring into the conversation is a major problem. And I think also part of the struggles, the genuine struggles that folks have in the workplace with the other generations are just differences in preferences. Because whilst I'm with you 100%, and I still stick to my point of view that largely is just putting labels on people, some things are true. Like, for example, different groups have different preferences when it comes to communication. So, and of course, it is a generalization, but older folks typically tend to lean towards in-person communication, ideally. And I see this with clients that we work with all the time. Like, people say, hey, let's meet in person. Can you come by our office? And with younger generations, it's really more about flexibility and a synchronous way of communicating. Definitely, even email is outdated. So it's Slack or other platforms. And obviously, they are very proficient with using them. But also, it seems to be a preference. And there will be personality differences there, but it seems to be a preference. I think that there are some differences in how generations view work-life balance and their expectations as to what it's going to look like. For younger generations, at least it's my experience, I would be curious to hear what you see. Younger generations really tend to see it as their right, not a perk, not a nice to have. And they are quite vocal about the need to have that. And finally, I think the third thing is what you talked about, the speed of adaptation, speed of change. So I think younger generations put these expectations on them, and naturally, because they are digital natives, they tend to adopt to particularly technological advances faster and better than the generations that haven't grown up, with the tech tools that digital natives have. Only naturally. It's a matter of skill, I suppose, and a matter of what you have been exposed to. And thinking about the nature of these three things, I tend to think that actually it doesn't have so much to do about age per se, like, what your birth certificate is. And it has a ton to do with the context and the environment and how you grew up. Because, of course, depending on when you were born and when you grew up, the environment and the conditions and the things that you were exposed to are completely different. And that causes some barriers between generations.
I like what you're saying, both around like context and expectations. And I can definitely second that. I think the kind of work ethic versus like work-life balance discussion, there is definitely a pivot point in there where it's like, suck it up or like try to balance it out. But I also feel like we tend to forget when we have these discussions quite often that it might be that a younger generation is pushing the question and raising it. But once that becomes a standard, it becomes a standard for all the generations. So there might be friction, but then at some point it actually becomes something that most people want and start to expect. Not necessarily everything, but I think in terms of like well-being and work-life balance, and it kind of, while it maybe was pushed from a certain place, it also kind of trickles into other groups and other age groups as well. And we tend to forget about it and think like people are isolated groups. And just because this generation said it, they're the only ones who think it's important. No, they might have been the one who brought it to light. And I think that's also like the circular nature of growing older in a way. And I think about it all the time, as you're saying, like digital natives. I have 2 kids who are 5 and 8, and they're definitely growing up, and we're trying to be quite restrictive with the tech because I feel like they have a lot of time to learn it. But it's also very clearly a part of their life and a part of their behaviors and a part of their expectations. And I can already sense at this point, even when I'm still much more proficient than them, that there will come a point not that far from now when I'm going to be surpassed by them. And they're going to think I'm old in the game of the tech that they're using. And that's just kind of how it goes in a way. There's always somebody who feels like, okay, I can't do any more new things. And maybe that's okay. I feel like we're problematizing this, but is it not true that that kind of is the case in every generation?
I think it is. And I think it's also the mere fact, when you think about the kids growing up today, where basically they have a lot of disposable time at their fingertips because they are still, not working full time, and they have plenty of opportunities to engage with new things. And, after 10 years of doing that, of course, they will have developed a skill that for someone who is older and who has never had those 10 years, let's say, of exposure and deep dive into technology, they will never have the same relationship, I think, with technology. So that is also true, that I think the younger generation who's growing up with the technology, of course, they are way ahead of their parents because they've just spent more time being exposed to it. And that's great. And let's not forget that whilst they have spent more time exposed to technology, one of the challenges that I think a lot of kids face today is they are spending less time interacting with and being exposed to other human beings on average. Even if you just look at the screen time of kids today compared to kids 10 years ago, you will see immediately that this must be taken away from the time, playing with their peers in the courtyard or just hanging out and doing something together. And that's an interesting dynamic for me too, because what that means is that whilst they are developing these technological skills, they are not getting enough opportunities to develop the human skills that are necessary in the workplace. And I know that you are one of the people who speaks about bringing more humanity into the workplace and how important that is. And this is where I think that complementary nature of generations can play out really nicely, because the younger generation can teach the older generation the tech skills, but I think the older generation has a lot to offer in terms of teaching the younger generation the human skills that they haven't had an opportunity to develop really well.
I really like that. And it also makes me think that we live in a society that really idolizes youth. And if we just even look back in our own generations, or we look at other societies or types of structures where people live, age is much more part of the ecosystem than it might actually be in a lot of westernized countries. So what do you think? When did age become a problem for us? And why? I don't know if you have any take on that.
It's, first of all, it's such an interesting question. I don't know exactly when it became a problem, but it feels to me like it started growing into a major problem alongside the technological revolution, where everything accelerated. It was really, and it is sometimes too hard for the older generation to keep up. And because the world and the innovation and where a lot of industries are going is, of course, tightly linked to technology and understanding technology. Suddenly, we have equated youth with technological abilities and therefore desirable skills, really, for the modern workplace. And so age, in the sense of older age, has become a problem because we started devaluing older individuals based on that premise that they don't have the skills and the adaptability that we need for the modern workplace. And that is very interesting because there are plenty of examples that show that this is not true at all. And, one of the people that I have recently spoken to, and some of our listeners have listened to this episode, I interviewed Chip Conley. And Chip Conley is a person, he's older than me. I think he must be around 60 right now. And he created a hotel chain called Joie de Vivre It was quite innovative at that time. And then, as someone with a lot of experience in hospitality industry, he was asked by the founders of Airbnb, two really young guys, to come into Airbnb and help them out. And I think it was one of the key factors that Airbnb was successful. And I think they were super, super smart to reach out to someone who has the experience and who is older and who can help them with the things that they were missing. So I think that some people who are really smart do understand that age is not a problem, and actually it can bring in a lot of value into the workplace. But generally, of course, we are struggling with ageism in the workplace, and it goes both ways, by the way, right? Because it's not only you are too old for certain things, but also it's you are too young for certain things. What do you know, right? Wait until you have some gray hair. I've been told, in my career, when I started consulting, I can't tell you how many times I heard this phrase. You need to wait until you have some gray hair to really have the respect of your clients. So it's a real thing. I think ageism goes both ways, and it is a problem in the workplace. I think it has something to do with technology for sure. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I definitely think technology plays a role. I'm a little bit tempted to take it even further back, maybe even the industrial era, because I think when there is value in being productive and speedy and, having nimble little fingers. And if we're looking at how those were set up, they were even having children work in there, and age, wasn't even necessarily something that was desired there. So I think, part of it's that. And then I'm also tempted to think about a little, and this is, of course, coming from me, and I live in Sweden, which is an extremely secular society where there's a huge value in independence. And I also know, there's a lot of policy constructed around that. You shouldn't have to be dependent on other people. Whereas like countries who might have more traditional, or I don't even want to say traditional, more community-based structure, whether they're based in religion or other things, they might have more tolerance and acceptance of like being part of this like communitarian ecosystem. So I also think that societies that push towards the individual independence a lot, and that's hard for me to peg down exactly when, of course, but just anything that pushes towards that, I also think starts problematizing age, because it then becomes like those are moments of dependency. When you're younger, when you're older, you kind of need other people in different ways to, just to like keep going in life. Actually, it's okay, but in very individual structure, it isn't. So I'm a bit tempted to actually like put those two aspects in there as well.
Yeah, this is spot on. I totally agree. I mean, it's definitely hugely cultural. And I do agree that especially Western individualistic cultures put a large emphasis on people being, as you say, autonomous and independent. And therefore, there is an assumption there that you don't need anyone. So especially, older people are not as needed in traditional society. And I think some scientists say that this is the evolutionary reason for old age, is actually helping out younger mothers, for example, older women helping out younger mothers with their children whilst the younger women were foraging, so looking for food. They would take care of the babies. So it was the structure of the society that required that. And it was pretty clear that every single member of the society was needed for the entire group to survive. And today we live with this illusion that we don't need anyone to survive. And, I think in difficult moments at work or in life, we're very often faced with the realization of how false that is, right? I think anyone who has struggled with anything really in their life quickly realizes that it's a lie that we are being told, because you really can't go through life alone. And there's absolutely nothing, I think, that we can accomplish worth mentioning if you haven't been helped by someone or haven't been able to share it with someone. It's worthless. So I'm glad that we're calling it out, because I think our Western culture has a lot of flaws when it comes to how we approach age in the workplace, for sure.
Yeah, or even just age in life, I think. There's a documentary called The Swedish Theory of Love. And it's about this exact movement in Sweden, I think in the 60s or 70s, where the ultimate goal was that nobody should be dependent on anyone else to live. But, and maybe it's not a but, what it has produced is the country in the world that has the largest amount of solo households. And when you're old, you're a little bit cast aside. There's not a lot for you. There's not a lot of things to support you. Whereas I have family in Israel and there is university. You can go to university. You don't take tests. You go to your lectures. People are driven from places to go to your university classes. There are places where you can meet. There are all these things that keep stimulating you in your aging and not discounting you in any way, still giving you that joy of those things.
I love that.
I keep thinking about that.
Yeah, I think that this is amazing. And, there are other societies that do it well as well. I mean, even when you think about the so-called blue zones where people live way beyond 100, and one of those places is Okinawa or Sardinia in Italy, some places in Greece as well. One of the key themes that comes through is that there is a very strong sense of community, and people have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And they have a reason to get out of bed in the morning because they are being useful to others. They have a role in the society and they are needed by someone. And as you say, they also have opportunities to grow, to develop. So they never really stop. They never really retire fully even, which is an interesting conversation to be had as well. But before we go there, I'm curious, Shani, since we talk about these better models of coexisting, both in the society, but also in the workplace, what are your thoughts on how we can harness age as a dynamic that is positive rather than getting stuck in it, especially in the workplace? What are some practices that you've seen that seem to work, or what are your thoughts on how we can fix this problem?
We fool ourselves a little bit when we were onto this before, like we start boxing everyone into generations and everyone who is in this box has these attributes. It's a little bit of a trap, I think. Anywhere where you can drive that discussion from curiosity and maybe even be curious less about the generation sometimes and more about the life cycle that people have. I really like that perspective. And I've seen beautiful discussions in relation to that, and also initiatives where it might not be as much if there are 10 or 15 years between people. It might be more if they're sharing a particular context. For example, when I had a new baby and a small child, I also had a manager who was in his late 40s, so 10 years older than I was, with a child the same age. And we had much more in common in our demands in the workplace, our energy, a lot of the things that we were needing in terms of our experience at work, even sometimes our energy for change, because you come home and you're in this constant change because you have a little person who's living through it. Whereas we had other colleagues who were the same age as him, but a lot of our kind of experience of work, there was much more bridging there because we were sharing this kind of moment in our life cycle. And then, of course, everyone has lived their story, but I think there is sometimes some use to daring to shift perspective there and thinking about moments in a life instead, and what it might be if employees have small children. And maybe it doesn't matter what age they are and what it might look like when they're just finishing education and they're alone, or they have a very different context that they're living through. And so I think sometimes just relating to people where they are in life rather than which generation can be a really good place to start.
Yeah. I want to play the devil's advocate here for a moment and kind of channel the question or the curiosity that some of our listeners might have around that, which I imagine might be, okay, that's great. And that sounds very nice, I suppose, but how does that help the business to be effective? I can see how it makes people's lives easier when you kind of think what their needs are according to the stage of the life cycle they are in. But we are not here to make people happy or comfortable. We are here to do something, I don't know, put out a great product into the world or whatever. So how are you thinking about that? How does that help the business to be successful as well?
I think for me, it comes down to knowing who you're enabling. And I mean, there are so many different lenses you can take into having data about your people. I think that sometimes the generational data becomes a little bit too narrow. And then it's not really inclusive of anyone who might fall within this role, because you might be a person who is single at 25 living on your own, but you might also be a divorced parent who has children at home 1 week and 1 week not. And maybe in those weeks, you're alone in your house and you have different needs and you have different requirements and you want to be met with a different experience. And it doesn't really matter then if you're 25 or if you're 47, these are the needs that you have. So I think for me, it's more about, as a business, thinking about what is it that we want to enable for people. And more than work being part of our aging process, work is part of our life. We age, we have to deal with that. But work is part of our life and it fits into our flow of life in different ways. And it's part of our everyday and how we construct it. And yeah, some things in what our life cycle looks like is probably that you have more people of a certain age in a certain part of the cycle. But I think the curiosity there shouldn't be so much about this generation and more about what does this life look like for these people and how does work fit into it at that point in time for them, or in that when those things are happening. At the end of the day, I think any business wants people to be able to come to their places of work, whether they're digital or physical or wherever they are, and contribute at their best. And very few people contribute at their best when they are met with assumptions and biases. This for me is offering another lens to be curious and kind of letting go a little bit of the age thoughts and instead just opening up to life being this flow of events that we have, the same as work days are. And how do we puzzle these things together, irrespective of how old we are or young?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And especially, that piece around it's all about enablement. And it's all about creating an environment where these specific human beings can do the best work of their careers. And as you say, this environment is probably going to be different depending on the stage in life that an individual is. So I can certainly see it. I had different needs when I was 30 and I have different needs when I'm 52 and in a situation that I am right now. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And what I see as necessary to be able to get there, because it does call for a big amount of personalization, I feel. To me, what's necessary is strong interpersonal connections in the workplace, because whilst data can be helpful, but I don't think that you can really gain that intelligence about where your team is and each individual and what they need, really, what kind of environment they need to thrive, you cannot obtain it through a survey. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you scale that organizational knowledge about where your people are, what sort of environment they need to thrive? How do you do it at scale?
I obviously work with human-centered design. And so that has a very special point of departure in always starting with qualitative research. You can do more, but I always think, a first step is to create your baseline of knowing who's in your organization. And if you have separate demographics, and really daring to ask the questions, and not from your place of assumption, but rather, what does a good workday look like for you? As we've been on to before, what is this best case scenario, or what does life look like, and where are you meeting challenges in showing up as your best self at this point in time? And then using that to guide us, because as you're asking about this kind of maintenance and setting up, I think where we sometimes fall short is that we grab data points from external sources or places, or somebody tells us these are the data points that we should be looking at. And we're actually not asking these questions about our organization and the people who are in our organization. And it's, of course, often that we then go, oh, all these 3 out of these 5, they're true for us too. And let's keep checking on those. But here are some more that we didn't know, and these are important. And so we often try to talk about this balance of then understanding, but then managing and maintaining, and how we can use this initial, really deep listening to get our baseline, to get our data points. And of course, you can add complementary quantitative data to it. So then you can go, okay, now we know these are the important things. We can ask more people about them, and we can get more data. But I do think, as you're saying, there's also a point in actually, from an enabling point of view, building that relationship. So going back to the relationships that you were talking about, understanding how they are built and what actually is meaningful to people. Because at the end of the day, I can have my preferences when I do this work, but they're completely irrelevant, because if I'm not working in that place and I'm not the person doing the job, then it doesn't really matter what I think, or whatever is boxed into my generation of thinking or preferences is actually start with the relationship that we're building at scale with our people, and dare to listen to them and leave our biases at the door. Really listen. And that's hard. I can tell you that's hard, because so many times, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, you come up with these things and you think, ooh, somebody's going to hear this and they're going to reject it before I've even finished the sentence, because it's going to seem too hard for them to address it or do anything about it. But yeah, I think, a start in that is actually daring to listen as an organization as well. And then shaping our enabling structures on that, not on somebody else's standards, on the standards of the people who are where you are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so incredibly important. I think for me, the point that really stands out in everything that we have discussed so far is that the conversation about generations in the workplace is so incredibly polluted with biases and generalizations and labels and assumptions. And they might be helpful sometimes. There are some useful shortcuts there, but it's lazy thinking too. I really appreciate your point about doing some work to really listen and to go beyond the labels and beyond the things that we believe we know about the people who work for us. That's huge. And to kind of wrap up our conversation, I wonder whether we can go a little bit into the future as well and talk for a minute about what will this intergenerational workplace look like in the future. What are your thoughts on that? What do you forecast, and what, in your view, are good practices to prepare for it?
I keep feeling like we are discounting age on both ends of the spectrum way too much. We're not enough leveraging the fresh eyes, and we're also not enough leveraging that there might be people who have come to a certain age and done 30, 40, even more years in a career. And maybe they want to slow down. And maybe that's an excellent opportunity for an organization to have a less than full-time employee who is super experienced at something, be part of something. I know I've seen this initiative here in Sweden where there's this group of builders and painters, and they're all retired. But you can go into their pool and they have this like standard rate. They'll come and do hourly work for you at their own convenience. And of course, this is their career, so they're fantastic at it. And they'll say, yeah, maybe I have 10 hours in a week, and that gives me a sense of meaning and joy, and I can come in and you get somebody who's amazing. There's a lot in the future where I hope we're able to better leverage that and accommodate for the fact that as we grow older and we've done a lot and we've given a lot to work, we might want to start creating an even more obviously different sense of balance. And I think, a lot of people, irrespective of age, are trying to do this now. But I definitely think when we get to that age, that there's this space of, pushes us in a little bit more towards the freelance economy or like part-time economy. If we can actually find interesting ways of doing that, then I also think we have a lot to gain in our organizations if we can accommodate for that desire.
Yeah, I agree. I love what Linda Grattan said about retirement and that it will no longer be a full stop. It will be more of a semicolon. So basically, you might pause or you might reduce your time, but people will definitely work longer. But also, actually, this evolution is not going to be linear. So I think what she and other people who talk about the future of work talk about is that it's quite possible that we will take short retirements throughout our career. And I see this happening already with some people in some professions. For example, a lot of people in my profession have been on a sabbatical recently, which is exactly what she was talking about, this mini retirement. And I love it because, a lot of people traditionally would talk about, when I retire, I will do A, B, C, and D. I will travel the world. I will, start volunteering or whatever. But given the fact that we probably have more time ahead of us, still being active in the workplace, it only makes sense to take a pause from time to time, to do something that is maybe a little bit, different from what your main career is. And I think the beauty of that is that you can bring in also that inspiration later on when you come back into your workplace. So that sounds very exciting to me. And speaking about people who are retired or semi-retired and working part-time, I think that's one thing that people will be doing for sure. So doing their actual job, but on their own terms and limited time. I also think, and I hope, to be honest, maybe not so sure about it, but I hope that a lot of people will also be mentors and consultants to younger generations in the workplace. So it's not just going to be the role of an individual contributor, but really taking on the teaching aspect there, especially when it comes, I think, to the human skills, because it feels to me that the older generation is going to be vital to help the younger generations to develop these skills. Like how do we have a difficult conversation? And we already see it. Like Gen Z, they are not really great at asking for what they want, about having a confrontation, about setting boundaries in a way that's constructive. So they might quit because they feel like they're not getting what they want, but they struggle to have the conversations that would lead to potentially to them actually getting what they want in the job that they are. And someone needs to teach them these skills because, we can't really, I can't imagine a healthy workplace without these human skills of giving and receiving feedback, empathy, having tough conversations with people, navigating conflict, addressing friction at work and stuff like that. So that's my hope, that people will still come back to their jobs after they've retired, partially to do some work, but also I think to teach younger people how to do the work, especially the aspects of the work that require more of the skills that traditionally we refer to as soft skills, which I know that none of us likes that term. So I'm referring to them as human skills.
I really like your point about retirement, like being more scattered out throughout life. And again, I think for me, it comes back to a world which had much more manual work and which was much more heavy, and where you would come to an age where your body just couldn't do it anymore. But with knowledge work, that's not true. You can be any age and have fantastic intellect and beautiful stories to tell and fantastic contributions to make. And it's kind of a privilege of this time in history as well to be able to age with such grace, because I was just even looking at photo albums a couple of months ago of my own grandparents. And there was a picture of my grandmother's mother, and she was 70, but I would have thought her at least 90 because of just the way that she grew up and the nature of life that she had. So yeah, I like that. We should have perhaps another view on work life altogether and who wants to be. I'm just even thinking, I remember having my first child and going on parental leave, and you kind of you feel like you're dropped outside of society because you're all alone. You're not going to work anymore. You don't see your friends because you used to see them at work or at certain times where you can't go anywhere anymore. And it's obviously not retirement, and it's a fantastic privilege to be able to do so. But it's also this thing where you're kind of really out of your context and out of a zone that gives you meaning and joy and fun. And I can imagine it also being a little bit the same if you actually like your work and you come to a certain age, and then from one day to another, you're just supposed to give it all up. And at the same time, as you're saying, why are we saving everything to do it when we're 65 or 67 or whatever the retirement age is, rather than finding ways of harmoniously combining life and work a little bit more throughout our career. So yeah, that really, really resonated for me.
I think especially because these breaks can be so incredibly nourishing when it comes to creativity and innovation. People will go away and do something completely different. And then, of course, these experiences, I think they always pay back in how we look at things at work and new ideas and the way we approach things. So I can see it as a huge opportunity for organizations as well to, say to their employees, hey, go and take a break. It's totally fine. And see you in a year, and we have a place here for you, which is a big conversation as well, because I think as our careers and the lifespan of these productive years extends, I think the ability to bring people back into the workforce in a smooth way where it's a good experience for them, but also it helps the business, it's going to be very important. I think one of the areas where the HR can potentially play a big role is creating that environment. How do you create that flexibility where people can pop in and pop out of their jobs as it's needed, and especially popping back in? It's hard. I mean, you were on parental leave. I don't know what the transition had been like for you coming back from your break, but I hear from a lot of parents that it can be hard. And there is certainly a huge amount of anxiety that accompanies that. And I can only imagine, how hard it must be if you took a sabbatical, to travel the world, how nervous people must feel about becoming irrelevant or no longer being wanted at work. So for sure, a great opportunity there for companies, for people in HR to start thinking about it. How do we create conditions for people to be able to do that?
I really like what we came up with here.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
I think it's time for us to start wrapping up and kind of sharing our key takeaways from the conversation. What are yours, Shani?
No, actually, this last thing really stayed with me, how I think we've viewed life and aging as a very, like, a long line, and you get to do these different things along the line, and there's no flexibility. You only get to take a break here, you get to do this here, and you're like this when you're in this place, and you're like that when you're in that place. And actually, it's a much more fluid space that we pop in and out of. And I like that notion of there is this transition going on now, a little bit, that we're still like circling how to frame it, but it's a lot about not looking at, now we're working for 30 to 50 years, and then we're going to retire, and then we're going to live life. And I think there is a big push to get out of those two boxes. And I feel for me, that's also attached to our perceptions of aging and how we're relating to our aging in different areas of our lives. So I really enjoyed this angle of it where we get to combine those a lot more. We're not working to live when we're 65. We're living and we're working and we're doing it all at the same time. And sometimes we get to do it from the place of being 25 and wide-eyed and excited. And later on, we get to do it from another point of experience and with other conclusions. And that's equally beautiful. And I'm seeing this more weaving together of life and work, and how there's so much opportunity for us in there when we figure it out. Yeah. How about you?
Well, this conversation made me think about this whole idea of inclusivity. And, as we discussed in our last episode, it's not just about race, gender, or sexual orientation. It's really about creating an environment where everyone feels that they can contribute. And in this particular context of our today's conversation, what struck me is that it has to be regardless of age as well. So this cross-generational inclusivity, it's important, and it takes some work to get there. But as we know, there's evidence to prove it. Diversity can be incredibly helpful for the businesses that get to the point where they are diverse. But it can also be quite destructive if you don't create the right environment where, apart from diversity, you also have inclusivity. And so I love your points about let's get away from the labels of age and let's focus more on the person, on the individual, and where they are in their life cycle and what they need so that we can create an environment where they can thrive. So that's my key takeaway, really, that yes, age is a factor and it's important, and we shouldn't feel like someone can't do something or can do something simply because of age. And it's not, certainly not everything. It's just part of the story of people's lives and what they need. And so we need to focus on the actual human being, not just how old they are. And not even, what phase of life, by the way, they are in as well, because I'm sure that certain individuals deal with certain situations completely differently. So I loved this point around individualizing and personalizing and finding a way to hear the employee's voice so that you can really, move from diversity to inclusivity and eventually reap all the, benefits that come with it.
I love that. It also makes me think of, even beyond thinking about it, even as a journey, just even identifying key moments. We've been talking about moments of transition in life, moments when you take a break for different reasons, when something happens in your life that's big, and it can be moments like that. And then you don't need the labels. You just need to understand who the people are that are impacted by these different moments.
Totally. Shani, as always, it was so good to be in conversation with you.
Likewise.
Thank you for being here. And to our wonderful listeners, we are really curious what you thought about this conversation. What are your thoughts on intergenerational collaboration and synergies that we can create in the workplace? And how do we build environments and cultures where people can thrive irrespective of what their birth certificate says? So hit us up on LinkedIn. Both Shani and I are quite active there. We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Aga.
Thank you, Shani. I'm Aga Bajer. the creator and host of the CultureLab podcast. And this is the CultureLab team.
Anis and Labarawi, production manager.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
I hope that you enjoyed this monthly format where Shani and I discuss all things culture. If you found this conversation interesting or inspiring, and chances are that you did since you are still listening here, you'll probably also love the conversation that I had with Chip Conley. You'll find the link in the show notes. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and follow the CultureLab podcast in your favorite listening app. And please do me a solid and leave a review. This is really helping the algorithm, and it's helping people like you to discover this show and get the help that they need and the ideas to cultivate an amazing company culture. And if you want to dive deeper into the topics and find like-minded peers who are in charge of culture work in their organization, you might consider joining CultureBrained. It's our one-of-a-kind culture accelerator program and a global community of peers that is truly shaping the future of work. You can learn more at tinyurl.com/CultureBrained. And with the promo code CB25, you will get a 25% discount if you join us by mid-November. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to get free resources on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: agabayer.com/resources. If you haven't subscribed to the CultureLab yet, please do it now. That's the best way you can support our work. And finally, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform that you listen to. Thank you, and you are amazing for listening to this point. Not many people do.